Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Speaker, I was the Minister of Police who asked the IPCA to investigate this case. And I did that because politicians can't interfere with police investigations. And I have to say I was the first police minister to ever refer the police to the IPCA. I was the person who referred the police to the IPCA. Because I knew that, as this report shows, that the IPCA can reach in to the individual investigations to have a look and report on how those investigations were conducted, that no politician can ever do. And when I look at what I said at the time, I said publicly that the Commissioner had assured me that the inquiry had been thorough. But I was not convinced that the full facts, and in fact, I was made aware that the full facts had not been made available to him as Commissioner, let alone to me as Minister. And it is what I said, it's exactly what I said at the time, because what had happened was we had had a number of changing, confusing stories given to us, both the Commissioner and myself, from the police on the ground that showed, as I say, confusion. So I could not be sure that the Commissioner had fully at his fingertips the facts of the inquiry, and in fact that proved to be the case. I think the things that worried me were, first, those stories were changing. I was also really worried about the age of all the participants, and that's something I'll come back to. 13 and 14-year-old girls with 16 and 17-year-old boys. I know that doesn't seem as an adult to be a big difference, but we all know in those teenage years that's a world apart between a 13-year-old girl and a 17-year-old boy, or even a 16-year-old boy. They are worlds apart. So I was really concerned about the ages of the youngsters involved. And I was also worried, and it's not just the police, it's widespread in our community, that when you have a young girl who's involved with sex and alcohol, and those of us that have been parents of young girls have often had experience with this, to actually talk about them as being able to make informed consent, I think is dangerous. And accept that their participation in those events was consented, I think is dangerous. And so those were the concerns that I had when I referred the police to the IPCA. And as a Minister of Police, that's not something you do lightly. The report today, the report that the IPCA released today makes me pleased that I took that decision, because all those concerns that I had have been validated in this report. And I have to say, like everyone in this House, we find the IPCA's findings really disappointing, because we have high expectations of our police, and rightly so. They are, I've always said, they are the best police in the world. We are very fortunate with the calibre of people that go into our police. And so we have high expectations of them, and we should have high expectations, and they've let us down. And what's more, they've let down young people, young vulnerable people in our community. And I'm also pleased because from today's report, the girls now have the full story. And so they understand what happened to them and their experiences, and why things didn't happen the way that they perhaps expected it to do. But I do want to sound a note of caution. The IPCA report released today found individual failures. It didn't find systemic failures. It found individual failures, and we should be making sure that we focus on those and find out, and the Police Minister has already indicated that he will ensure that they are individual failures and that they are remedied by better systems. And the police have made enormous changes since the Dame Margaret Baisley report. which was a 10-year process. It was not just about changing policies, it was about implementing those policies, and the audit report on that shows that, they are making progress, but they've still got a way to go. And of course, I'm absolutely delighted that they have someone like Louise Nicholas working with them with all the experience that she brings. But the police today have accepted that there was poor practice by their teams, there was poor supervision, there was poor communication. We had different police stations involved, and I have to say we had different SIF officers involved, and they didn't talk to one another, and it meant they didn't connect the dots, and therefore they were not able to protect those young women. And the recurring theme through it was, yes, they did treat those young women, they did treat them well, and the IPCA makes that comment, but that recurring theme of their reluctance to go further because the young women were reluctant to take it further overrode their responsibility to protect the wider group of vulnerable young people in the community. And I think that's very important, and the IPCA report actually says that because officers concluded that there was insufficient evidence to proceed without the cooperation of the young women, they decided that no further action was required, and they therefore overlooked the importance of holding the young men accountable for their behaviour and preventing its recurrence. So the police whole focus on prevention was let down because they didn't focus on that part of the issue rather than the wishes of the young women. And we all understand why those young women, the young girls of 13, 14, don't want to go through that process. However, there's another dimension I just want to bring forth today, and that is that I believe, as Social Development Minister, I believe that SIF should have done better in this process. Because it's clear that they were involved in all of this and their processes weren't good enough either, and that comes out through the IPCA report, where on a number of occasions they refer to the fact that something has been discussed with SIF and follow-up action wasn't taken, records weren't kept, and so again those dots weren't joined up early enough along. So I have agreed today that an independent review by the Chief social worker, Paul Nixon, based here in Wellington, will be put in place to go over the complete practice of SIF in those officers concerned, and I hope that from that we will then be able to match that with the very thorough review that the IPCA has done, and ensure that what we have learnt from this, that the processes are changed, that policies are put into place to prevent this happening to any group of young, vulnerable New Zealanders again. And of course, the workings of those combined teams, the CPT teams, who are specialists in dealing with young people and sexual issues, it's absolutely critical that they are working together cohesively. But more importantly, I think the thing that worries me the most with my current SIF minister hat on is who is responsible at the end of the day for the well-being of those young, vulnerable people if a prosecution cannot take place because there's not sufficient evidence. And I pick up the point that it is he said, she said. That's the justice system. People are innocent until they're proven guilty, and we change that at our peril. But in the meantime, there are young, vulnerable New Zealanders, both girls and boys, who are involved in really dangerous activity. And someone, somewhere, has to take responsibility for dealing with that and protecting them and working with their families to keep them safe. And if there's one thing that we all learn out of this, from the police perspective, from SIF perspective, and from us as politicians, is that we have to give that credence to that thought that someone has to take responsibility, even if a prosecution can't take place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.